She was rejected by the British War Office, rejected by Florence Nightingale's own nursing team, rejected by every official organization she approached. Her response? She took every penny she had, booked her own passage, and sailed herself to a war zone. Mary Seacole didn't wait for the world's permission to do extraordinary things. She was done waiting. This is her story. Mary Jane Grant was born on November 23, 1805, in Kingston, Jamaica, into a world with very specific ideas about who mattered. She was the daughter of James Grant, a Scottish lieutenant in the British Army, and a free black Creole woman known simply as the Doctress. And it was her mother who shaped everything. The Doctress ran Blundell Hall, a boarding house that doubled as a convalescent home for British military and naval officers. Men who arrived broken from cholera, yellow fever, the brutalities of tropical disease. They passed through her mother's hands, and more often than not, they left on their feet. Mary watched all of it. She watched her mother use West African herbal remedies. She watched her mix traditional Jamaican folk medicine with hygiene practices observed from military doctors. She absorbed everything like a sponge. And then, like any true scientist, she started experimenting. First on her doll, then on the family's pets, and eventually, alongside her mother, on actual patients. By her teens, she had an understanding of tropical disease that most trained European doctors simply didn't possess. Cholera, yellow fever, dysentery. She knew how they spread, how they progressed, and, crucially, how to treat them. She was also something else entirely for her time. She was free. As the educated daughter of a Scottish officer and a respected black businesswoman, she occupied a position of unusual social standing in Jamaican society. That independence would define the rest of her life. But understanding disease from a boarding house in Kingston was just the beginning, because Mary Seacole didn't stay in Kingston. In the years that followed, she did something remarkable for a woman of her era. She traveled, alone, without a chaperone, without a sponsor, without the social protection women of the time were expected to require. She visited the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti. She moved through the world on her own terms, building her skills and her confidence with every new place. She married Edwin Seacole in 1836. Their marriage, by her own account, was a quiet and modest one. Edwin was a merchant and not a particularly healthy one. He died in 1844. Shortly after, her mother passed too. Most women of the Victorian era would have collapsed under that weight. Mary Seacole, in her own words, turned a bold front to fortune. She took over her mother's hotel and kept going. Then, in 1850, cholera swept Jamaica. 32,000 people died. Mary Seacole did not run from it. She ran toward it, deploying everything her mother had taught her in a relentless effort to save lives. A year later, she went further. Her half-brother had established a hotel in Panama, right in the thick of the California gold rush, a transit point for thousands of prospectors crossing the continent. Mary joined him, and there, in the jungles of Central America, she faced one of the deadliest cholera outbreaks of her life. She treated patients through the epidemic. She documented her methods. She learned. By the time the Crimean War broke out in 1853, Mary Seacole had more hands-on experience with the diseases that killed soldiers, cholera, yellow fever, dysentery, than almost anyone alive. If you're finding Mary's story as remarkable as I do, hit subscribe. We uncover stories like this every single week, and you really don't want to miss what's coming next. So in 1854, she came to Britain. She had heard about the suffering of British soldiers in Crimea, inadequate medical care, rampant disease, men dying not from wounds, but from infection and neglect. She had exactly the skills they needed. She knew it, and she was determined to go. She applied to the War Office, rejected. She applied to the medical department, overseeing the campaign, rejected. She applied to Florence Nightingale's nursing team, rejected. She applied to every official channel she could find, rejected, rejected, rejected. She never spelled out the reason explicitly, but it didn't take much to read between the lines in Victorian Britain. She was a Creole woman of mixed race, in a country that had only recently abolished slavery. The doors that opened for others simply did not open for her. Mary Seacole's response was extraordinary in its simplicity. She decided she didn't need those doors. She used her own money. She partnered with a relative of her late husband and financed the entire expedition herself. In 1855, she arrived in Crimea and established what she called the British Hotel, a restaurant, a canteen, a resupply point for officers. She sold food, wine, provisions. She managed it like the businesswoman she was. But when the battles came, and they came, the menu didn't matter. She went to the front. She moved through artillery fire to reach the wounded. She dressed injuries, administered medicines, brought comfort to dying men. The soldiers adored her. They called her Mother Seacole. To them, she was as vital as any official nurse on the field. And then, in 1856, the war ended. And everything Mary had built fell apart. The British Hotel was overstocked. The peace came faster than expected. Mary and her business partner were left with warehouses full of unsellable goods and debts they couldn't repay. She returned to London near bankrupt. But the soldiers remembered. British officers organized fundraising events, benefit concerts, public appeals, to support the woman who had cared for them in Crimea. The press wrote about her. She became, briefly, a celebrated figure in London's social circles. In 1857, she published her memoir, Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. It became the first autobiography written by a Black woman in Britain. In it, she described her travels, her treatments, her time in Crimea, her business ventures, all of it. It is frank, funny, occasionally sharp, and entirely her own voice. And then, almost as if history pressed a reset button, she was forgotten. For nearly 100 years, Mary Seacole's name barely appeared in the historical record. Florence Nightingale became the iconic face of Crimean nursing. Mary Seacole became a footnote. If that. It wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that historians, and especially Black British communities, began to reclaim her story. In 2004, she was voted the greatest Black Briton of all time. In 2016, a statue of her was unveiled at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, the same location associated with the institution where Nightingale had worked. Not a replacement, not a competition. A recognition, finally, that the history of nursing, the history of courage, and the history of women in this world is bigger, wider, and richer than we were ever taught. Mary Seacole spent her entire life being told the world had no room for her. She kept finding her own way in anyway, and that is her legacy, not just what she built in Crimea, but what she proved was possible when a woman refuses to accept other people's definitions of her limits. If you want more stories of women who changed history on their own terms, subscribe. We're just getting started. And drop a comment below. Who do you think deserves the next spotlight? I read every single one.